The knock came at midnight, and Adrian Vane, Duke of Ellesmere, was awake to hear it, because a man does not sleep the night before he marries a woman he has never once heard laugh. His valet did not knock at midnight. In 9 years, Pelham had never knocked after the candles were carried up. So Adrian was already on his feet, already crossing the cold floor of the bedchamber in his shirt sleeves, when the door opened the width of a hand, and Pelham stood there, with a guttering taper and a face the colour of tallow. "Your Grace." The valet's voice had gone thin. "She is not the writer." 4 words. Adrian stood very still in the spring dark, the chill of the boards rising through his bare feet, and felt the whole careful architecture of the next morning, the wedding, the vows, the bride he had chosen from a year of letters, tilt very slightly on its base. Outside, some way past the stable yard, a late hawthorn had come into flower, and the smell of it drifted through the half-open casement, sweet and green, and entirely indifferent to the fact that a man's life was about to come apart. "Say that again," Adrian said. "Miss Marchmont." Pelham would not meet his eye, which alarmed Adrian more than the words. The man had laid out his coats and shaved his jaw and held his secrets for 9 years, and had never, in all that time, looked at the floor. "The letters you have been answering this 12-month, Your Grace. The hand you fell in love with. It is not hers. I have carried every one of them to the post myself, and I have watched who folds them. And I can hold my tongue no longer with the banns read, and you to stand up before God in 9 hours' time." The taper guttered. Wax ran over Pelham's knuckles, and he did not seem to feel it. "Whose, then?" Adrian said. It was not a question. His voice had gone to the flat register his solicitors had learned to dread. "I will not say it standing in a doorway." The old man's chin came up at last, and there was something fierce in it. "But I will tell you the road, and I will saddle the grey myself, if your Grace means to ride it before the church doors open, which I am praying you do." There are decisions a man believes he is weighing, when in truth they were made before he knew there was a scale. Adrian was reaching for his boots before Pelham finished speaking. He had been an honest man his whole life, which is a different thing from a happy one. The dukedom of Ellesmere had come to him at 23, with its debts and its tenants and its 300 souls, who ate or did not eat, according to whether the new duke kept his head. And Adrian had kept his head so thoroughly, and for so long, that he had nearly forgotten he owned one of any other kind. He did not gamble. He did not drink past the second glass. He had buried his father, settled the entail, drained the south fields, and rebuilt the Weaver's Row at Ellesmere village stone by stone. And in 7 years, he had not once permitted himself a thing he wanted merely because he wanted it. The letters had been the first. It had begun as duty, like everything else. He was 2900 a year short of his obligations, and the estate needed an heir and a fortune both. And the Honourable Miss Sophia Marchmont, only daughter of the late Viscount Sturton, had £30,000 and a face that the few who had seen it called the finest in 3 counties. Their families had corresponded. A betrothal had been arranged at a distance, soberly, the way such things were arranged among people who could not afford to be sentimental about them. Adrian had agreed because it was sensible, and because at 27 he had stopped expecting his life to be anything but sensible. And then the letters had come. He could not now remember which of them had undone him, the third, perhaps, the one about the rooks, or the one in November, where she had written 4 lines about the precise blue of a winter dusk that had made him put the page down and walk to his own window to see if it was true. They were not the letters of a fine face in 3 counties. They were strange and exact and quietly funny, full of the kind of observations a person only makes when no one is watching them make them. And somewhere, in the long correspondence of that year, Adrian had done the thing he had sworn he had no time left in him to do. He had fallen in love with a woman through her sentences, sight almost unseen, and he had thanked whatever distracted providence governed dukes that the sensible marriage and the foolish heart had, for once, agreed to ride in the same carriage. Now Pelham stood in his doorway and told him the carriage had been empty all along.
"The grey," Adrian said.
"And bring no lantern. I do not want the house roused." It was 11 miles to the village Pelham named, 11 miles of chalk lane silvered by a thin spring moon, and Adrian rode them at a pace that would have shamed him in daylight. The grey was sure-footed, and the road was dry, and the hedgerows streamed past, green-black and heavy with the wet earth smell of a country only lately come into leaf. He did not let himself think. Thinking was the thing he was good at, and he was afraid of where it would take him. So he gave himself to the cold, rushing air and the drum of hooves, and the single hard fact that somewhere at the end of this lane was the truth, and he meant to have it in his hands before the bells rang. He found the house by the directions Pelham had pressed into his palm, written in the valet's careful, clerkly hand. A low, grey cottage at the edge of the Marchmont land, a tenant's house, with a single window lit gold against the dark. Adrian dismounted in the lane and stood a moment, with his hand on the cold gate, and his heart was going harder than the ride could account for. A woman was awake at 1 a.m, writing by a candle burned almost to its socket. He could see her through the uncurtained glass. She sat at a plain deal table, with her dark head bent and her hand moving, and even from the lane, even in that poor light, Adrian could see the thing that letters cannot carry. The line of a throat bent to a task. The small frown of someone composing a sentence she has not yet got right. She wore a plain wrapper, the colour of ashes, and her hair had come half down. And she was, without any question and without the smallest help from her circumstances, beautiful. Not the catalogue beauty he had been promised. Something fiercer and more inconvenient. A face made interesting by the intelligence working behind it. He opened the gate. It cried on its hinge, and the woman's head came up. For a moment they looked at one another through the glass, the Duke in the dark garden, and the woman in the lit room, and Adrian watched her go white, then very still, then composed. A whole storm crossed her face and was put away inside the space of 3 breaths. She rose. She came to the door and opened it herself, no servant, no candle but the one guttering behind her, and she stood in the doorway with her chin level and her ink-stained fingers pressed flat against her skirt, as though she were holding something down. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was low and even, and it was, he understood at once, the voice of the letters. "You are 11 miles from where you ought to be tonight." "I know precisely where I am," Adrian said. "I have ridden here to learn who you are." She did not flinch. He would think of it after, that she had not flinched. "I am the woman who is going to ruin your wedding," she said. "You had better come in out of the cold while I do it." The room was small and clean, and entirely a contradiction of itself. The walls were tenant's bare lime wash, the table was deal, but every flat surface bore books, and the books were not a tenant's books. He saw Linnaeus, and a French botany in calf binding, and a stack of the monthly reviews, and a folio of pressed plants opened to a sprig of something he did not know, its Latin name written beneath, in the hand he had carried next to his chest for a year. A fire had burned down to embers because no one had rung for more coal, there being no one to ring. The whole place smelt of tallow and ink, and underneath, very faintly, of dried lavender. "Sit, if you can bear a hard chair," the woman said. "I am Clara Hartwell. I am Miss Marchmont's cousin, after a fashion, and her companion, after a worse one, and for 14 months I have been her hand. Every letter you answered I wrote. Every blue dusk, and every rook, and every cleverness you were good enough to admire, mine. She supplied the franking, and the name, and the face you will marry in the morning. I supplied the rest. There, it is said. You may go and be sick into my one rose bush if you like. I should not blame you." Adrian did not sit. He stood with his hat in his hand in the middle of her small, ruined room, and felt the floor of a year drop out from under him. And he found, to his own great surprise, that the first thing he wanted to do was laugh. Not from amusement, but from the sheer vertiginous wrongness of it. The way a man laughs when he has missed a stair in the dark. 14 months, he said.
14. And the blue dusk
Was real. I was standing at that window. She nodded at the black glass. I do not invent the things I describe to you, Your Grace, whatever else I have done. I have never lied to you in a single sentence. I have only let another woman sign them. That, said Adrian, is the most precise lie I have ever heard described. Something flickered at the corner of her mouth, gone before it arrived. Yes, she said. I have thought so myself, at about 3 in the morning, several dozen times. He set his hat on the deal table, beside the open folio, and looked at her properly for the first time. She bore it. Most people did not bear being looked at by him. They found things to do with their hands. Clara Hartwell stood with her ink-stained fingers laced in front of her, and let him take his fill. And he understood that she had decided, somewhere in the last quarter hour, to give him every true thing she had, and let it cost her whatever it cost. Why tell me now? He said. You have kept it 14 months. You might have kept it a lifetime. I should never have known. We should have lived out our days, she and I, and you in some back room with the accounts and the correspondence, and the cleverest woman in the county would have spent her life ghosting love into another woman's marriage. His voice had roughened. He heard it and could not stop it. Why ride out and meet me at the gate? Why open the door yourself? For the first time, her composure showed a seam. She looked down at her own hands, at the ink, and when she looked up, her eyes were very bright. Because your man Pelham is a better Christian than I am, she said. And because I found, when it came to it, that I could write you into loving a lie, but I could not stand in a church and watch you swear yourself to it. That is the whole of my courage, Your Grace, and you may judge it as poor stuff. I could ruin 3 lives in ink. I could not do it in front of the altar. The hawthorn smell had followed him in through the open door, or else she kept a sprig of it somewhere in the room. Adrian stood in the silence and listened to the small collapse of an ember in the grate, and thought that he had ridden 11 miles to find a villainess, and had found instead the only honest person he had spoken to in a year. Tell me about Sophia, he said. She told him, and it was worse and simpler than he had feared. The Honourable Miss Sophia Marchmont was, Clara said, exactly as beautiful as the county reported, and exactly as little else. She was not stupid. Clara was scrupulously fair on that point, fairer than Adrian thought the woman deserved. But she was idle and vain, and she had understood early that her face was a fortune and her cousin's wit was a tool, and she had used them both the way one uses a fortune and a tool, without gratitude and without a second thought. When the Duke's suit came by correspondence, Sophia had read the first letter, declared herself bored to extinction, and handed the whole affair to Clara to manage, as she handed Clara the mending and the household books and the writing of the dull notes to dull relations. She told me to make it sound well, Clara said, and to keep you keen, and not to trouble her with the details. I do not think it ever occurred to her that you might fall in love with the letters rather than the £30,000. It certainly never occurred to her that I might. She stopped. The words had got away from her. He saw her catch them, too late. That, said Adrian gently, you did not mean to say. No. She turned and crossed to the fire and crouched and built it up with her own hands, 2 pieces of coal and a fanned breath, buying herself the space to put her face in order. When she rose again, she was composed. I am the daughter of a clergyman with no living and a widow's portion that failed with my mother. Miss Marchmont's father took me in at 13 because his late wife had been my mother's friend, and I have earned my bread in that house ever since by being useful and quiet and grateful. A woman in my position does not fall in love with dukes, Your Grace. It is not done. It is in the worst possible taste. I assure you, I have lectured myself on the subject more thoroughly than you ever could." "You have an unfair advantage in the lecturing," Adrian said. "You write better than I do." And there it was again, the flicker. And this time it won. And Clara Hartwell laughed. One short, startled note, her hand going up to her own mouth as though to catch it. It transformed her. The careful companion's mask fell clean away, and underneath was the woman of the letters, quick and warm and alight, and Adrian felt the bottom go out of him a second time that night, in a wholly different direction. "You are not behaving at all as a betrayed bridegroom ought," she said, recovering. "I am aware. I keep waiting to feel the thing I am supposed to feel. Instead, I find I am 11 miles closer to it than I was at midnight, and rather afraid of the church." He picked up the open folio, the pressed sprig under its careful Latin. "What is this one? You never wrote me about this one." "Hawthorne." She came to stand beside him, near enough that he could smell the lavender of her, and put one ink-stained finger lightly on the dried bloom. "Crataegus monogyna. It flowers in May, and the country people say it is unlucky to bring indoors, and I bring it in every year out of pure contrariness, and nothing ill has ever come of it. I was pressing that one when your gate cried." "Unlucky to bring indoors," Adrian repeated. "So they say, and yet here it is, and here am I." He set the folio down. "I begin to think, Miss Hartwell, that your luck and mine run on the same contrary line." She did not answer that directly. Instead, she crossed to a small chest beneath the window, knelt, and lifted out a flat, japanned box of the kind a careful woman keeps her few treasures in, and brought it to the deal table and opened it under his eyes. Inside, tied with a thread of green silk, was a thin sheaf of paper, and Adrian, looking, felt his breath stop, because he knew that paper. He had bought it. It was the cream-laid stock he had used for a year, and these were his own letters, the ones he had written into the dark all that 12-month, kept and ordered, and read until the folds had gone soft. "You kept them," he said. "Of course I kept them. I am the one who answered them." She did not look up. Her finger moved along the edge of the topmost sheet, not quite touching the writing. "Do you imagine I could write a year of replies to a man, and feel nothing for the letters that earned them? I have your hand by heart, Your Grace. I know that you cross your sevens in the foreign manner, and that you write faster when you are pleased, and the line tilts up at the end, and that the one about your father's funeral was written so slowly the ink pooled at the foot of every downstroke. I read that one a great many times. I should have liked to answer it as myself. Instead, I answered it as a woman who did not care, in words I had to invent for her, and it was the loneliest letter I ever wrote." Adrian stood over the open box and the green silk and the soft folded proof of his own undoing, and something in his chest that had been braced since midnight came quietly apart. "Read me one," he said. "One of mine. I want to hear it in your voice. I have spent a year imagining your voice and getting it 11 miles wrong. I should like, before the church, to have it right at least once." She hesitated. Then she drew out a sheet. Not at random, he saw. She knew exactly where her hand was going. And she read, low and even, a passage he had forgotten he had written, about a hard frost over the south fields, and a hare he had startled at dawn, and the way the country went on being beautiful, whether or not a man had anyone to tell it to. In her mouth, the words were not his, and not hers, but some third thing made between them. And when she came to the end, she folded the sheet along its soft crease, and laid it back in the box, and was quiet. "That is what I came 11 miles to hear," Adrian said, "and it has cost me my whole sensible life to hear it, and I find the price entirely fair." "You should not say such things to me." But she did not put the box away. I have nothing to set against them. I cannot write you out of this one. You are standing in the room. You have an unfair advantage of your own, Your Grace. You may simply say the true thing, and I have spent 14 months learning to say everything except that. Then practice, he said. We have until the clock strikes. Say one true thing to me as yourself, with your own name on it, and I will count it the best letter you ever sent. She looked at him a long moment across the open box, and the fire ticked, and the hawthorn smell hung between them. And at last she said, very quietly, I did not want you to marry her. I told myself it was conscience. It was not conscience. It was the plainest jealousy. And I've been ashamed of it for a fortnight. And there, that is true, and my name is on it, and I shall probably never forgive you for making me say it aloud. She shut the box with a small, decisive click. You are a dreadful influence. I was a perfectly disciplined liar before you rode up to my gate. She did not step away, but she did not move to put the proper distance back either, and for a moment the two of them stood over the closed box and the pressed flower in the fading firelight. 11 miles, and a whole social order from where either of them was supposed to be. Then the long case clock in the corner, the one fine thing in the room, a clergyman father's relic, struck 2, and the spell broke, and the morning and the church, and the £30,000 came back into the room like cold air through an opened door. You have 7 hours, Clara said quietly. You must decide what you are going to do with them. He rode back through the last of the dark, with the whole disastrous shape of it laid out before him. And for the first time in 7 years of disciplined dukedom, Adrian Vane did not know what he ought to do. The honourable course was plain and unbearable. He had given his word. The bans were read, the settlements signed, the £30,000 wanted. 300 souls at Ellesmere depending on the drained fields and the rebuilt Weaver's Row, and the heir the marriage was meant to make. A duke who jilts a viscount's daughter at the church door in the year of grace makes a scandal that travels 3 counties by the next post, and his tenants pay for it in slighted credit and frightened landlords, and a great house name gone suddenly cheap. He could not afford to be a man who broke his word. He had never once been that man. It was, very nearly, the only thing he was, and he was in love with the wrong woman. Had been for a year, it now appeared, only he had been directing it 11 miles wide of its object. The sky greyed over the Ellesmere woods. He came up the long avenue at a walk, the grey blowing, and Pelham was waiting at the stable-yard arch with a lantern he had not lit, his face a question he was too well trained to ask aloud. You will write to wake me, Adrian told him, swinging down. I do not yet know what it will cost you, telling me. It may cost you your place. I will not let it cost you your character. Whatever happens this morning, you leave my service with the finest letter a duke can write, if you choose to leave it. I did not do it for a letter, Your Grace. The old man took the grey's bridle. I did it because I have dressed you for your father's funeral, and your majority, and every dismal duty in between. And I had a fancy to dress you, just the once, for something you actually wanted. He paused. Did you find her, then? I found her. And? Adrian looked up at the lightening sky. And I am going to behave very badly, he said, in a manner I have not yet worked out. Lay out the grey morning coat. If a man is to disgrace himself before God and the county, he had better do it well dressed. He had 4 hours, and he spent the first of them doing the thing he was best at, which was thinking, and the thing he was worst at, which was thinking about what he wanted. By the time the house woke, he had a plan, of sorts, and the plan was honest, and it was terrible, and it would cost him a great deal. And that, he had decided somewhere in the last cold mile of the ride home, was precisely how he knew it was the right one. For 7 years, he had measured every choice by what it would preserve. He was about to make one, for the first time, measured by what it would cost. And he found, to his own astonishment, that he was not afraid. He was awake. He had not been properly awake in years. He sent for the carriage early. He would go to the Marchmont house, where the bride and her people were gathered, 2 hours before the ceremony. An irregularity, a breach of every custom. But a duke may breach custom and call it eagerness. And there, in the morning room, before the wedding, he would have the truth out in the open, where it could not be folded into another woman's name. He did not, of course, expect Sophia Marchmont to make it easy. She received him in the morning room of her late father's house, in a gown of saffron silk, already dressed for a wedding that was not, he thought, going to happen. And she was, Clara had been scrupulously fair, the most beautiful woman Adrian had ever seen. It was a beauty with no draught of warmth in it anywhere, a beauty like a fine, cold morning, and he wondered how he had ever, even at a distance, mistaken £30,000 and a perfect profile for the woman whose sentences had undone him. Your Grace. She gave him her hand, and a smile that had been practiced at a glass. This is very forward of you. I am not certain it is even lucky to see me before the church. I have been thinking a great deal about luck this morning, Adrian said. Will you sit, Miss Marchmont? There is a thing we must speak of before we stand up together, and I would rather speak it here than have it spoken for us later. Something moved behind the lovely eyes, quick, calculating, gone. She sat. She arranged the saffron silk, and in the doorway behind her, summoned by the Duke's own request to the housekeeper, Clara Hartwell appeared in her plain ash-grey gown, with her hands folded and her face white. And Sophia did not turn to see her, but Adrian watched the back of Sophia's neck go rigid, and knew that she had heard the door, and knew exactly who stood in it. Your letters, Adrian said, have been the great pleasure of my year. How kind. Sophia's voice was honey over ice. I have read each of them a dozen times. The one about the rooks, the one about the blue of a winter dusk. He watched her. Tell me, Miss Marchmont, what colour was that dusk? In your own words. I have forgotten, and I should so like to hear you describe it again. The room went very still. It was a cruel question, and he knew it was cruel, and a part of him was ashamed, and a larger part watched the beautiful face in front of him, with the cold attention of a man who has been deceived for 14 months, and once, just once, to see the deceiver caught in open ground. Sophia Marchmont was idle and vain, and she was not, Clara had insisted, stupid. She understood in an instant what was being asked, and why, and by whom. And she did not falter. He gave her that. She lifted her chin, and her eyes went to a point on the carpet, and she said, with the smooth confidence of a woman who has never in her life been refused anything she reached for, It was blue, Your Grace, as a winter dusk is. I am sure I cannot improve on what I have already written. You would not have me bore you twice with the same sentence. No, Adrian said softly. I would not. And he turned deliberately and looked at Clara in the doorway, and Sophia, following the line of his gaze at last, turning in her chair, saw the two of them looking at one another, and understood the whole of it, and the lovely cold morning of her face cracked clean across. What followed was not a scene Adrian was proud of, though he would not have undone a word of it. Sophia rose from her chair so fast the saffron silk hissed. She has been telling tales. Her voice had lost its honey altogether. Whatever that creature has poured in your ear, Your Grace, she is a paid companion. She is nobody. She has lived on my father's charity since she was a child. And this is how she repays it, by crawling into a duke's good opinion behind my back. She crawled nowhere. Adrian's voice did not rise. It rarely needed to. She rode out to no one. I went to her at 1 o'clock this morning on the word of a servant who could not in conscience let me marry a forgery. Miss Hartwell did not seek me. She tried, in point of fact, to send me back to you. She has more honor in her ink-stained hands than this whole house has in its £30,000, and I will thank you not to call her a creature in my hearing again."
"You cannot mean—"
Sophia stared at him, and for the first time, the calculation behind her eyes failed her entirely. She was looking at a sum that would not come right.
"You cannot mean to throw me over for a clergyman's brat with ink on her fingers. The settlements are signed. The banns are read. You will be the talk of 3 counties by Tuesday. You will ruin yourself."
"Almost certainly," Adrian agreed. "Over letters. Over a year of pretty letters. Over the woman who wrote them." He inclined his head, very correct, very cold. "I am sorry, Miss Marchmont. Not for declining to marry you. We should neither of us have survived it with much credit. But for the manner of it, which is graceless, and for which I take the blame. You wanted a duke. You should have one yet, I think. You have the face for it, and now you have the warning. But you shall not have me, and you most certainly shall not have her." He had said the unsayable, and the room held its breath, and into the silence, because there is always, in the worst silences, a clock. The long case clock in the hall struck the half-hour, and somewhere across the fields, the bells of St. Anne's began, very faintly, to ring the wedding that the bridegroom was, at that precise moment, declining to attend. It cost him, of course. Everything costs. He did not marry that day. He stood in the morning room of a viscount's house and listened to the bells ring an empty church, and watched a beautiful woman's fury harden into something colder and more dangerous than fury. And he understood that he had made an enemy who would not forgive, and that the price of the mourning would come due over months, in slighted credit and whispered scandal, and the slow, grinding hostility of a county that does not love a duke who jilts a bride at her own door. And it was worse than that, because Sophia Marchmont was clever after her own narrow fashion, and she had a weapon to hand, and she used it before the bells had stopped ringing. "You think you have rescued her," she said, very low, so that only the two of them and Clara could hear. "You have ruined her. A paid companion, dismissed without a character, who lured a duke from his own betrothal. That is the story, Your Grace, and it is the only story anyone will believe, because it is the one that flatters everybody but her. By nightfall, every drawing-room in the county will know that Clara Hartwell stole another woman's bridegroom. I shall see to it personally. You may have your clergyman's brat. You will have her, with no name left to give her." She smoothed the saffron silk with hands that did not quite tremble. "Marry her, if you dare. You will be marrying the most thoroughly disgraced woman in 3 counties, and every door that opens to you will close to her, and you will watch it happen, and you will know you did it." She swept from the room. Adrian let her go, and when he turned, Clara was no longer white, but grey, and she was looking at him with an expression he could not read and did not like. They had a little time before the carriage. He took her out into the cold morning garden, away from the servants and the staring footmen, under a hawthorn just coming into its own white flower. And there, in the open air, the day caught up with both of them at once. It was, Adrian would think long afterward, the happiest hour of his life, and he had not the smallest idea at the time that it was about to end. The crisis was over, and the danger not yet arrived, and into that strange, suspended morning the two of them stepped as though the world had granted them a clear half-day out of time. The frost was lifting off the grass in a low, silver steam. A blackbird was going through its whole repertoire in the hawthorn over their heads, extravagant and indifferent, and Clara, the strain breaking at last, did the thing she did instead of weeping. She found the absurd angle, the way she always had in the letters, and she began, helplessly, to be funny about the catastrophe. "Do you know," she said, "I've spent 14 months writing you the most considered sentences of my life, and now that you are standing in front of me,
I find I have lost the use of language entirely. It is very humbling. I had thought myself rather good at words.
You are rather good at words.
On paper. In person I appear able to manage about 11 of them, and 4 of those were a Latin name. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and her eyes were bright, and not entirely with laughter. Your Grace, this is a disaster. You understand that this is a disaster. You have thrown over an heiress for a woman with 2 gowns and a great many opinions about botany, and she has just promised to ruin me, and she will. She is exactly the kind of person who does the things she promises.
Adrian, he said. She stopped.
My name is Adrian. You have written to me for 14 months. I think you may use it, in a garden, with no one by. He turned to face her under the white tree. And it is not a disaster. A disaster is a thing that happens to you. This I have chosen, with my eyes open, knowing the cost, which is the first thing in 7 years I have chosen for no better reason than that I wanted it. I will not let you call it a disaster. You may call it ill-advised. You may call it the worst-dressed scandal in the county. You may not call it a thing I regret. You will regret it, she said, but it came out without conviction, and she was looking up at him now in a way that had nothing of the companion in it at all. Tell me one thing first, Adrian said. When you wrote the letters, when you sat at that deal table at 1 in the morning writing love into another woman's name, who were you writing to? She was quiet for a long moment. The blackbird sang. A hawthorn petal came loose and fell between them. You, she said at last, very simply. I was always writing to you. I told myself it was a commission. It was the most dishonest thing I have ever done, because every word of it was true. And that, Adrian thought, was the whole of it, the strange, exact heart of the year. And he had his hand half raised toward her face, and the morning had narrowed to the space of one white flowering tree, and the woman under it, when across the garden a footman came at a half-run with a folded paper, and the news that broke the morning clean in 2. The note was from the Ellesmere steward, sent express, and it had crossed Adrian's own road in the dark. It said that old Mr. Ordus, the family's man of business in town, had heard a thing he thought his Grace should know before the wedding, and had ridden through the night to bring it. That the late Viscount Staunton's affairs were not what the betrothal settlements had represented. That the £30,000 Sophia Marchmont brought to the marriage was encumbered 3 times over against her father's debts, and that the whole arrangement, the correspondence, the keeping keen, the hurrying on of the match, had been steered from the Marchmont side, not by sentiment, but by a family at the edge of ruin, desperate to fasten a solvent duke to a foundering name before the duns closed in. Adrian read it, standing under the hawthorn. He read it twice, and the second time, a cold understanding moved through him that had nothing to do with the money. Clara, he kept his voice level. How much did you know? About the debts, about why the family wanted the match made so quickly. He watched her face, and he saw. There was no mistaking it. It crossed her too openly to be feigned. He saw that she had known something. Not all, but something. I knew the house was in difficulties, she said slowly. I keep the books. I knew the match was wanted badly and quickly. I did not know it was... She stopped. Adrian, I did not know it was as bad as that. But I knew it was wanted, and I wrote the letters that wanted it, and I... She did not finish, and she did not need to, because he had already gone somewhere she could not follow. For he was a man who measured himself by his honesty, and he had just learned that the woman he had chosen this morning over duty and fortune and his given word had been, however reluctantly, however much against her own heart, the instrument of a fraud designed to fasten him to a sinking ship. The letters that had won him
had been written to serve a desperate family's need of his solvency. She had said it herself an hour ago, in her own small room. "I could write you into loving a lie." He had thought it the most honest thing he had ever heard. He saw now that it was also, exactly and unbearably, the truth. The petal fall, the blackbird, the lifted hand, it all went very far away. "You wrote me into it," he said. "You wrote me into loving the thing that was meant to catch me." "Adrian, you said it yourself." His voice had gone back to the flat solicitor's register, the one he hid behind, and he hated himself for reaching for it, and reached for it all the same. "Over 1 o'clock this morning, in your own room. You can write a man into loving a lie. I rode 11 miles thinking you the one honest person in this whole affair, and you are the one who built the snare. With your own clever hands. With the sentences I—" He stopped. He could not say it. Clara Hartwell stood under the white hawthorn with the frost steam rising round her ankles, and she did not defend herself, and she did not weep, and she did not reach for him. She had courted him through a year of ink, and she had ruined her own wedding to save him from a forgery, and she had told him every true thing she had in a cold room at 1 in the morning. And now she stood and watched him decide, on the strength of a steward's note and his own old wound, that the most honest woman he had ever known was a liar to the bone. He had built her loyalty into proof of her guilt, and she could see him do it, and there was nothing in her power that could stop him. "I see," she said. The 2 words came out perfectly steady, and that steadiness cost her more than weeping would have, and Adrian was too far inside his own ruin to see the price of it. "Then there is nothing more for me to say to you that you will hear. You came 11 miles to find out who I am, Your Grace. It seems you have decided." She gathered her ash-grey skirts. "I hope, for your tenant's sake, you find a wife who has never once told you a true thing. You will trust her completely." She walked back across the steaming garden toward the house, her spine very straight, and she did not look back, and Adrian let her go, and the blackbird in the hawthorn sang on as though nothing in the world had broken at all. He did not marry anyone that spring. He went back to Ellesmere, and he did the things a duke does. He met with Aldous and unpicked the Staunton settlements clause by clause, and was relieved, in the cold way that was all he could manage, to find himself free of the encumbered fortune. He saw to the south fields. He walked the rebuilt Weaver's Row. He sat at his father's desk in the long evenings while the spring greened into summer outside the windows he no longer looked out of. And he was, by every measure he had ever used, perfectly in the right. He had been deceived. He had nearly married a fraud. He had, by the narrowest margin and the loyalty of an old valet, escaped a trap baited with the cleverest letters in 3 counties. And the woman who had written them had admitted, in her own words, to baiting it. A sensible man counted himself fortunate and moved on. Adrian was the most sensible man in the county, and he could not move an inch. His aunt came down from town in June to see what was to be done with him, which was her way of saying she had a list. Lady Caraway was 60 and indestructible, and she arranged marriages the way other women arranged flowers, by ruthless instinct and a complete indifference to the feelings of the stems. She sat in the long drawing-room with the windows shut against the warm afternoon, because she distrusted air, and she laid 3 names on the table between them, like a woman dealing a winning hand. "The Ashby girl has 12,000 and a placid disposition," she said. "The elder Miss Vane, of the Suffolk branch, no relation to speak of, has rather less, but excellent teeth, and a mother who knows when to be silent, which, in a wife, is worth 4,000 a year on its own. And there is the Carlyle widow, who is older than one would like, but has buried 2 husbands without scandal, which argues a steadiness of nerve. You will be 30 in 2 years, Adrian. The county is beginning to call you romantic, and there is no surer way to ruin a duke than to let the county decide he has feelings." "I have no feelings whatever," Adrian said. "I'm told it is one of my chief assets." "You had none," his aunt agreed darkly, "until this spring, when you rode off in the night and jilted a perfectly serviceable Viscount's daughter at her own door, and have since gone about with the expression of a spaniel that has lost a particular stick. I am not a sentimental woman, but I am an observant one, and I will tell you what I see. I see a man who has talked himself out of the one thing he wanted by calling it a fault. I have watched 3 generations of this family do it. Your grandfather did it, and grew old and alone in a house full of good furniture. Do as you please, but do not marry the Ashby girl to spite a feeling, because the feeling will outlast the marriage, and then there will be 2 of you unhappy instead of 1, and I shall have to come down from town again, and I dislike the country in August." She gathered her 3 names and her gloves and went up to dress for a dinner she had no intention of enjoying, and left Adrian alone in the shut, warm room with the things she had said sitting in the middle of the carpet where he could not walk round it. He had talked himself out of the one thing he wanted by calling it a fault. He turned it over. He could not make it false. He had carried her letters next to his chest for a year, and he could not now put his coat on without feeling the absence of them. He found himself, at his own table, composing sentences he would never send. He passed the open casement where the hawthorn smell had once come in, and turned his face from it. And the thing he could not get past, the splinter that worked deeper the more he tried to ignore it, was not what she had done, but the look on her face when she had said, "I have never lied to you in a single sentence." He had believed it utterly at 1 in the morning. He had thrown it away by 10. Nothing had changed in between, except a steward's note about a late Viscount's debts, and the old certainty, laid down in him at 23, that a man who lets himself want a thing will have it turned into a blade against him. He had not, he began to understand, decided that Clara Hartwell was a liar. He had decided that he could not bear to want her and be wrong. The first was a verdict. The second was cowardice, dressed in a verdict's clothes, and Adrian Vane had never in his life been able to live comfortably with a thing once he had seen it plainly. It was Pelham, in the end, who said the second 4 words that changed his life. And he said them while brushing a coat, without looking up, in the tone of a man commenting on the weather. "She has been turned off, Your Grace, Miss Hartwell, without a character." The brush went on, slow and even, the bristles dragging over the wool with a small, dry whisper. "Dismissed the week after by the young lady for, and I have this from the Marchmont undercook, who is walking out with our second footman, so it is reliable, for ingratitude and presumption. She has gone to a cousin in the next county, who did not want her, by all accounts, and took her from charity, the same as the last lot." The brush stopped. Pelham looked up, and his lined face had in it a thing Adrian had not seen there in 9 years, which was anger, held very carefully behind the eyes. "She did not tell the county, Your Grace. Miss Marchmont threatened to spread it, that the companions stole the bridegroom, you'll recall. She never did. Not a word of it anywhere. The companion took the whole blame, and the whole ruin, and said nothing, and let it stand that she was turned off for impudence, sooner than have the world told a single thing against you." He resumed brushing, as though the matter were closed, and had only ever been a remark about wool. "I only mention it, as it bears on the question of who, in this business, has been honest." Adrian sat very still. "She protected my name," he said, "at the cost of her own. Yes, Your Grace. From a man who decided she was a liar." The old valet shook out the coat. "I have dressed you for a great many duties. I should like, before I am too old for it, to dress you for an apology. They are harder to fit than funerals, but they wear better." He did not set out the next morning, because a man who has spent a whole ruined spring and summer being wrong does not get to be hasty about being right. He spent a week first, which Pelham privately considered 6 days too many, and said so by laying out the travelling coat each morning and putting it silently away each night. He went to Aldous, and he had a thing drawn up, and he made the old lawyer draw it 3 times, because the first draft was correct and cold, and the second was warm and improper, and only the third was both honest and unanswerable, which was the standard Clara had set him without ever meaning to.
He went through her letters, his own letters, returned to him in a parcel by the Marchmont housekeeper, with a curtness that told him exactly whose orders it came under. And he read the year of them again, slowly, looking this time not for proof of her crime, but for the woman who had written them. And he found her on every page, and was ashamed it had taken him a steward's note and an old valet and his own aunt to see what had been in plain ink the whole while. And then, on a wet, grey morning at the end of August, he had the grey saddled rather than the carriage, because he found he wanted the 40 miles in the weather, wanted to arrive cold and wet and undignified and entirely unducal, a man and not an office. Pelham handed him up without comment, and only as the grey turned its head to the lane did the old valet say, to the horse rather than the rider, "Mind you bring him back married, or did not bring him back at all. I am too old to dress this one for another funeral of his own making." Adrian found her in the next county, in a cousin's cramped house, on a wet, grey day at the very end of a summer he had spent being right and miserable. He had not sent word. He had thought about it for the whole it was nearer 40 miles. And he had decided that a man who had condemned a woman on the strength of a note he had not let her answer did not get to announce himself in advance. He came to the door with his hat in his hand and his fine carriage absurd in the narrow lane, and a harassed maidservant showed him into a back parlour that smelt of damp and other people's cooking, and there, at a borrowed table by a meagre fire, with a cousin's mending in her lap instead of her botany and her own letters, sat Clara Hartwell, gone thinner and quieter, but with the same unbearable straightness of spine. And she looked up at him, and her face did not change at all, which was how he knew how much she had practiced not letting it. "Your Grace." She did not rise. "You are a very long way from where you ought to be." "I have noticed," Adrian said, "that I appear to be at my best a very long way from where I ought to be. I have given the matter some thought, and concluded it is because the places I ought to be have generally been chosen for me by my sense of what I owe, and I am tired to death of it. May I sit? I have ridden a great way to say something I find I have never properly learned how to say, and I should like to say it sitting down, so that you can see I do not mean to leave the moment it is out." She gestured, wordless, at the hard chair across from her. He sat. He set his hat on the borrowed table. He looked at her mending and her meagre fire, and her 2 gowns, and the whole reduced shape of what his certainty had cost her. And he found that the speech he had built over 40 miles had deserted him, and that what was left was only the true thing, unadorned. "I was wrong," he said. "Not partly, not in the manner of it. Wrong to the root. You told me at 1 o'clock in the morning that you had never lied to me in a single sentence, and you have not. And the proof of it is that you took a ruin you did not earn sooner than let the county hear one word against me, which I learned from my valet, not from you, because you would not even tell me the cost of my own folly." His voice was not steady, and he let it not be steady. He had spent a year teaching it to hold. He let it fail now, deliberately, because she had earned the truth, and the truth had a tremor in it. "I built your loyalty into your crime because I was afraid, Clara. I have wanted nothing for 7 years because wanting is how they get a hold of you. And the one time I let myself want a thing, it came wrapped in a fraud, and I took the first excuse to call it false, sooner than risk being a fool who loved a liar." He looked at his own hands then, the gloves he had not removed, the cold of the riding still in his fingers. "So I made you the liar. It was the most dishonest thing I have ever done, and I did it to the most honest person I have ever known.
And I've been the very thing I accused you of being every single day since. The mending had gone still in her lap. For a long moment, she did not speak at all, and the meagre fire spat, and the rain went on ticking at the small dark window. And Adrian made himself sit in the silence and not fill it, because he had learned, too late and at her expense, that a man who rushes to be forgiven is only asking the wounded party to do the last of his work for him. You decided I was a liar in the time it takes to read a steward's note, Clara said at last, and her voice was very quiet and not at all soft. I stood under a tree and watched you do it. I've had a whole spring and summer to think about that morning, Your Grace. I've had little else to think about between the mending. And the part I cannot get past is not that you were cruel. You were not even cruel. You were certain. You looked at me, and you were perfectly, instantly certain. And a year of letters did not weigh so much as a single line from your steward. She set the needle down with great care, as a person does when the steadiness of the hands is the only steadiness left to them. So before you say another word, I should like to know one thing. And I should like the true answer, the kind you have so lately learned to write. What is to stop you doing it again? The next time a paper crosses your road in the dark with my name in it and an ugly reading on it. What is to stop the Duke of Ellesmere being certain all over again, and me with no tree to stand under and no cousin's house left to go to? It was a fair question and a hard one, and he did not reach for the flat voice to answer it. He let it land. She was looking at him with those bright eyes, and she did not help him. And he did not deserve to be helped. So he went on alone. Nothing is to stop me, he said. That is the true answer, and it is a poor one, and you deserve it sooner than a comfortable lie. I cannot promise you I will never again be a fool. I have been one at long intervals, my whole life, and I expect the habit will outlive me. He leaned forward over the borrowed table, his cold hands open on the worn wood. What I can promise is the thing I failed to give you under that tree, which is the chance to answer. I was certain, because being certain is faster than being wrong out loud in front of someone, and I would sooner have wronged you in silence than risked you watching me doubt. That was the cowardice. That was the whole of it laid bare. And I have looked at it every day since the spring, until I could name it without flinching. He held her eyes. So here is what changes. The next time a paper crosses my road with an ugly reading on it, I will bring it to you, and I will put it in your hand, and I will let you answer it before I let myself believe it. The way you have always made me read the true thing for myself, instead of taking it on trust. I will not give you my certainty, Clara. I will give you my doubt. It is the more honest gift, and it is the only one I have that is proof against me. Something in her face moved at that, some held thing easing by a fraction, but she did not speak, and he did not presume on it. And I do not come with much else. I have unpicked the Staunton settlements. I have a name that is the talk of 3 counties. I have an old valet who likes you better than he likes me, and is probably listening at the door. A small sound came from the hall, hastily stifled. I have 300 tenants, and a great cold house, and a heart that has been entirely useless since the spring, for want of a particular hand at the end of a letter. And I have this. He took it from inside his coat, where her letters had used to ride, and laid it on the table between them. A single folded sheet, sealed with the Ellesmere arms. He had written it the night before, 4 times, the way one writes a load-bearing thing. It is to my man Aldous, he said. It instructs him to settle on Miss Clara Hartwell, absolutely and in her own right, the income I should have settled on a wife, whether or not she will have the man who comes attached to it. It is signed. The seal is mine. You may break it and read it, and tell me to go to the devil with my carriage and my apology, and my 40 miles. And the settlement stands regardless, because I will not have it said, even by you, even justly, that the Duke of Ellesmere left you to mend a cousin's linen for a kindness you did him at the cost of your whole good name. He sat back. Break the seal, Clara. I would rather you saw it in my hand than took my word. You taught me that. You always wrote me the true thing where I could read it for myself. For a long moment she did not move. The wet summer rain ticked on the small window. Then she set the mending aside, and she reached out, and her ink-stained fingers, they would always be ink-stained, he thought. He hoped to God they would always be ink-stained, broke the Ellesmere seal, and unfolded the sheet, and her eyes went down the lines of his hand, and stopped, and went back, and read one line aloud, very low, as though to be sure of it. To be hers, and hers alone, married or single, near to me or as far as she chooses to go. She looked up. You would settle it on me even if I sent you away. I would. That is either the most honorable thing I have ever seen a man do, Clara said, or the most outrageous attempt to make an apology unrefusable, and I genuinely cannot tell which, and I have been considered clever about such things. It is both, Adrian said. I have learned this year that the honest thing and the thing one badly wants are not always at war. Occasionally, if a man is very fortunate and rides far enough in the dark, they turn out to be the same thing, wearing different coats. He paused. I am asking you to marry me, Clara Hartwell. Not the letters. You. The 11 words in person, and the 4 of them in Latin, and the spine you will not bend, and the laugh you catch behind your hand. I have made an unholy mess of deserving you, and I do not expect to be forgiven in an afternoon. But I am told apologies wear better than funerals, and I find I have a great many years I should like to spend wearing this one in. Clara Hartwell looked at the man across the borrowed table, the Duke who had ridden out at midnight on a valet's 4 words, and come, by a long and graceless and entirely human road, all the way here to a back parlour that smelt of other people's cooking. And the careful companion's mask, the one she had worn since she was 13, did not so much fall as quietly, finally, set itself down. You will have to let me keep writing, she said. I warn you now. I shall write to you even when we are in the same room. It is a defect of character. I think more clearly with a pen than a tongue, and I always shall. I am counting on it. I shall answer every one. I've had a year's practice, and I've got rather good. He had not breathed properly in some moments. Is that a yes, Miss Hartwell? I find I am not clever enough to tell, and I have ridden a long way, and the suspense is... It is a yes, Clara said, and the word broke on something that was half a laugh and half the thing she did instead of weeping, and she put her ink-stained hand across the borrowed table into his, the first time they had touched, his cold and hers warm and inked, and the rain ticked on the little window, and somewhere down the hall an elderly valet gave up all pretense and openly, joyfully, wept. He took her back to Ellesmere that same week, with the cousin's grudging blessing and a great deal of the cousin's relief. And the engagement that the county had braced itself to disapprove of turned out, in its early days, to be conducted chiefly across a desk. For Clara discovered the Ellesmere correspondence within a day of arriving, and was appalled by it. The Duke, it emerged, answered his tenants and his stewards and his men of business in a hand so curt and so cold that 3 of them had privately believed for years that he disliked them, when in fact he merely disliked writing, and had been compressing whole seasons of genuine care into sentences with the warmth of a closed door. This will not do, she informed him, the morning she found the letter-book. She had it open on the great desk and was reading aloud from it in tones of real distress. Listen to this. A man writes to tell you his wife is mending after a hard winter, and that the new roof on the Weaver's Row kept his children dry for the first year in his memory. And you have answered, Adrian, you have answered. Noted, Apply to Aldous for the spring seed."
"That is not a reply. That is a receipt."
"It conveyed the necessary information," Adrian said, with the dignity of a man who knows he is about to lose. "It conveyed that you are a glacier with a signet ring." She dipped the pen. "Sit there, drink your coffee, look ducal, which you do beautifully, and to no purpose whatever. I'm going to teach you to answer a man as though he were a man, and not an item on a list. And by Michaelmas, your tenants are going to think you have undergone a religious conversion." And so, the strangest courtship in 3 counties was carried on at a shared desk in the long library. She writing the warm, true thing, and he learning, slowly, and against the grain of 7 disciplined years, to put his name to it, and mean it where it could be read. He found he liked it. He found, more startling still, that the warmth had been in him the whole while, dammed up behind the cold hand, and that what she had really done, what she had been doing, he thought, since the first letter she ever ghosted, was simply give his own feelings somewhere to go. "You realize," he said one evening, watching her cross out a sentence of his and write a better one in the margin, "that you are once again writing letters in another person's name." The pen stopped. She looked up at him, and the old, quick light came into her face. "So I am," she said. "But this time, the name is going to be mine soon enough. And this time, the man at the other end of the post is the man I am writing to, and not the woman I am pretending to be. I find I do not mind ghosting at all, Your Grace, so long as the ghost is allowed to marry the house she haunts." She handed him the corrected page. "Sign it, and cross your 7s in the foreign manner. Old Tomlinson at the mill is fond of them, he told me so. He has been keeping your letters too. It seems you are a great deal more loved than you have ever troubled to find out." Adrian signed it, 7s and all, and thought that of all the accounts he had ever balanced, this was the only one that had ever come out so far in his favor. They were married in the autumn, on a clear, cold morning, with the frost still silvering the churchyard grass, and the smell of wood smoke and fallen apples drifting up from the village. The small church at Ellesmere had stood 800 years, and married a great many dukes, and it had never, the old sexton said afterward, smelt so strongly of crushed bay and late roses, for the tenant women had stripped their gardens bare to dress it, and the cold stone of the nave was warm with the breath of every soul on the estate, crowded shoulder to shoulder in their Sunday best. The light came slantwise through the east window, and lay in long coloured bars across the flags. A robin had got in among the rafters, and sang through the whole service, indifferent and shrill, and somehow exactly right. And the bride, when she came up the aisle on the arm of a cousin who had not wanted her, and now could not stop telling people he had always known she would do well, wore not white, but a deep autumn russet, the colour of the beech woods, with a single sprig of out-of-season hawthorn, coaxed into late bloom in the Ellesmere glasshouse by a head gardener who had heard the story and wept over his frames, pinned at her breast. Adrian watched her come the length of the church, and thought of a candle burned to its socket, and a window full of black glass, and 4 words spoken in a doorway at midnight, and he found his own eyes were not entirely dry, and did not trouble to pretend it was the cold. The weaver's row had turned out entire. The tenants stood in their best, and one elderly valet in a new coat sat in the front pew, openly weeping now and past all pretence of weather, watching the 2 people he had brought together with 4 words and a guttering taper become, before God and the whole grateful estate, exactly what he had risked his place to make them. The county talked, of course. It talked for a season, and the talk was not kind, and it gathered itself for one decisive engagement at the first great dinner the new Duchess gave at Ellesmere, to which it came armed and curious, in its best silks, fully intending to find the clergyman's daughter wanting, and to go home satisfied. It found instead a small, straight-backed woman, with ink she had not quite scrubbed from one finger, seated at the head of a long table, who disarmed the first sally before the soup was cold. Old Lady Margrave, who had buried a baronet and several reputations, and considered herself the arbiter of the district, observed across the table, sweetly, the way a cat is sweet to a bird, that it must be a great change for her Grace to come up so very far in the world all at once.
Oh, enormous,
Clara agreed warmly, before the table could draw its collective breath.
You have no idea, Lady Margrave, what it does to the nerves. A fortnight ago I was mending a cousin's linen and being grateful for my dinner, and now there are 19 servants who all know precisely how a duchess ought to behave and are far too well trained to tell me. So I am obliged to learn it by watching their faces, which is exhausting. And twice already I have curtsied to the under-butler by mistake. He was very gracious about it. I begin to think he should have the title and I should carry the candles. He at least knows where everything is kept.
There was a startled silence, the particular silence of a room full of people deciding whether they were permitted to laugh. And then the Duke, at the far end of his own table, said, perfectly grave, "She did curtsy to Alice. I saw it. He has not stopped talking of it below stairs. We shall never get the man's hat to fit now." And the room broke, and went on breaking all evening, because it turned out that the new Duchess could not be made small by anyone present, for the simple reason that she had got there first. And a woman who tells the joke against herself before you can has taken the only weapon you brought. By the fish course, Lady Margrave had thawed. By the time the cloth was drawn, she had appointed herself Clara's particular champion, and was telling anyone who would listen that she had always said the Ellesmere match showed sense, which was the precise opposite of what she had said for a season, and which everyone present had the tact to pretend to believe. The county, finding the Duke of Ellesmere serenely indifferent to its talking, and the new Duchess disarmingly willing to be funny about herself at her own table, gradually decided that it had always rather admired a love match, and came to dinner and stayed. As for Sophia Marchmont, she came, in the end, to the one place Adrian had not expected. It was a grey morning, early in the new Duchess's first winter, and Clara was at the great desk in the Ellesmere library that Adrian had given over to her entirely, surrounded once more by her Linnaeus and her reviews and her pressed plants, when the footman announced a name that made her set down her pen. Adrian rose to send the woman away. Clara stopped him with a hand on his sleeve. "Now," she said, "let her come in. I have wondered." Sophia entered the library in travelling clothes, the saffron gone, dressed plainly and for a journey, and she was still the most beautiful woman in 3 counties, and there was something new in the lovely face, a tiredness, a thing that had been worn down rather than broken. She did not sit. She stood in the middle of the room where the morning light fell, and she put something on the great desk within Clara's reach, and stepped back from it. It was a single sheet, and it was in Sophia's own hand, and she had clearly written it herself, slowly, a woman unused to writing her own letters, making the labour of one. "I am going to my mother's people in the north," Sophia said. Her voice had lost the honey and the ice both. What was left was merely flat, and human, and tired. "There is a widower there, with more money than sense, who will have a viscount's daughter with an encumbered name, and I shall be a great lady in a cold county, and serve him right. I came to give you that before I went." She nodded at the sheet. "Read it. I should rather you read it in front of me than wonder, after, whether I meant it." Clara took up the page. She broke nothing. There was no seal. Sophia had not the Duke's habits. And she unfolded it, and read aloud, in the even voice of the letters, the single line that mattered. "I, Sophia Marchmont, declare that every letter sent under my name to the Duke of Ellesmere was written by my cousin, Clara Hartwell, and that the fault and the cleverness were both hers and never mine, and that I dismissed her for a crime that was my own." Clara looked up. "Why," she said, "you owe me nothing. You owe him less." "I owe myself the not having to remember it," Sophia said. "I am vain, Miss Hartwell. Your Grace, I had better learn to say. I am vain, and I am idle,
and I married a man's solvency in my mind before I ever saw his face, and I have been all of that quite cheerfully for 25 years. She drew her gloves smooth across her knuckles, finger by finger, the small, precise vanity of a woman who had nothing left to do with her hands. But I find I do not care to be also the kind of woman who let her cousin starve for telling a duke the truth. It is the one expensive scruple I have, and I've come a long way out of my road to spend it. You may keep the paper, show it to the county, or burn it. I find I do not greatly mind which. A ghost of the old, cool smile crossed her face, and for the first time, it had something almost rueful in it. He chose well in the end. I never could write a sentence worth reading. I do hope you will both be insufferably happy. It will annoy a great many people, which is the best thing happiness is good for. She inclined her head to Clara, and then, after a barely perceptible pause, to the Duke. And she went, and they heard her carriage on the gravel, and that was the last either of them ever saw of Sophia Marchmont. Clara held the paper a long moment. Then she crossed to the fire, and Adrian thought she meant to burn it, and found he did not mind either way. But she did not burn it. She folded it small, and laid it inside the calf-bound French botany, between the title page and the pressed sprig of hawthorn she had carried with her from a tenant's cottage to a borrowed parlour to a duchess's library. And she closed the book on it. "For the record," she said, "and not for the county. I am done with letting other women sign my name, but I find I do not want to set fire to the one time someone signed her own to set me free." She came back to him at the great desk. "It cost her something. You taught me that too. The apologies that cost something are the only ones worth keeping." On the first warm morning of the following spring, the Duke of Ellesmere came down very early, before the household had properly stirred, and found his wife already at the long library window with the casement open, a sprig of new hawthorn in her ink-stained fingers, and the green, wet smell of the garden coming in. He had learned, in their first half-year of marriage, that she rose before the house to write, and that he was the one person in the world permitted to interrupt it. And he had also learned not to waste the privilege on small things. "You are bringing it indoors again," he said, coming to stand behind her, his hand finding the curve of her shoulder. "I am told it is unlucky." "So they say." She turned the white bloom in the light. "I have brought it in every spring of my life, contrary creature that I am. And the worst that ever came of it was that a duke rode 11 miles in the dark and the strength of 4 words, and would not leave me alone afterward." She tilted her head back against him. "I have decided to risk it." Below them, the garden steamed silver in the new sun, and the blackbird was running through its whole extravagant repertoire in the hawthorn by the wall, the same as it had on the morning everything broke. Only now, nothing was broken at all. Adrian looked at the flowering bough in her hand, the one she had pressed at 1 in the morning in a cold room the night he first knew her, the one she had carried through ruin and out the other side. And he thought that of all the things he had ever owed and paid and chosen, this was the only one he had got entirely right. "Write me something," he said against her hair, "even though I am standing right here." "I always do," said Clara, and reached for her pen. If you have ever been won by someone's words long before you ever saw their face, or known that the truest thing a person can give you is not the easy truth, but the costly one, then this was a story for you. Tell me in the comments which 4 words you would ride out into the dark to answer. And if Adrian and Clara's road home warmed you, stay a while by the fire. Subscribe, and I will have another story waiting the next time the candles are lit.